For the 2010-2011 school year, Broward County was awarded a grant to establish a program called Teaching American History. The focus of the program has been the presidency in the 20th century. The program started in June 2010 with an intensive week of study. Each month throughout the school year, there were one or more special study experiences. The culminating study opportunity was a full week in Washington, D.C. from June 13th to 17th, 2011. Millions of people visit Washington each year and view the same buildings and monuments we did. However, our purpose was to find deeper meaning behind what we saw and heard so that we can help our students develop deeper insights into what the origins of past America have been or are and how we function today. This video is a description of that intensive experience, which I call Behind the Icons, What It Means. The group assembled before 5 a.m. on June 13th to board the U.S. Air Flight number 986 to Washington. Upon arrival, we boarded the bus and headed for the museum. I've invited Bill Plant to give us a short overview of this very creative museum.
Now this is real history. Here are news reports from the 16th and 17th centuries that go back. Here's the Boston Newsletter, one of the early newspapers in the United States, the New York Weekly Journal. This is the kind of thing that people were able to read at the founding of this country. And this is pretty much where it all began, in this country anyway. Down there you see a printing press. That's what they looked like in 1776 when the Declaration of Independence was printed. They call this the First Amendment Gallery, and is devoted to the freedoms which the First Amendment guarantees. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom to petition. Of course, there may be some things that the First Amendment doesn't cover. Here's Bart Simpson at the blackboard writing, "The First Amendment does not cover burping." A lot of people, of course, don't trust the press, and a section of this museum is devoted to the mistakes and lies of the press. The display covers things like using unnamed sources, which is very controversial in journalism. Here's a picture of Judith Miller, who went to jail, a New York Times reporter then, because she would not give up her sources in the trial of Louis Libby. And then there are the mistakes that we make in journalism. Here are some famous newspaper headlines. The one at the top, President Harry Truman holding up a copy of the Chicago Tribune that said Dewey defeats Truman, which of course wasn't true. It was the other way around. Here's something else that bothers a lot of people about journalism, but it's part of journalism. It's called sensational journalism or tabloid journalism. As the banner says, it's about sex, crime, and scandal. And there's a great quote from Jerry Seinfeld. He said, "People that read tabloids deserve to be lied to." I don't know if I'd go that far, but you got to know what you're looking at when you look at some of these tabs. Elvis seen at Graceland, headless body in topless bar. One of the galleries in the museum is devoted to the great tragedy of our time, the catastrophe, the attack of 9/11. Wall of newspaper headlines covering the attack, and the centerpiece is a piece of the antenna from the North Tower of the World Trade Center, which of course was salvaged after the attack. This is a pretty stark reminder of what it's like when there is no freedom. It's a guard tower from the East German side of the old Berlin Wall. During the Cold War, there was no more visible symbol of the divide between East and West. It's blank on the East side. You couldn't express yourself, you could be shot. But on the West side, there were expressions of outrage and anger and cries for freedom.
We were there to learn about the resources of the museum so that we could use them in our classrooms. A very energetic hands-on seminar was conducted by museum personnel. Here we took visual backgrounds and developed stories to go with them. Our creative juices were flowing, and you can see the colorful graphics we came up with. Too bad you can't hear the somewhat off-the-wall descriptions that go with them. Of course, there was much more we could have seen. Here is my picture of the Berlin Wall. This graphic depicts the big questions about our 5 freedoms: speech, press, assembly, religion, and petition. I also took a long look at the ladder used in the famous Lindbergh baby kidnapping and the electric chair used to execute Bruno Hauptmann for the crime. I wanted these pictures because I teach a unit on this crime. Time was short, however, and while others explored the museum, a number of the group volunteered to be part of a CBS town hall meeting audience that was being recorded by CBS for airing the next day. The focus was on the Republican positions. Here is the introduction of that experience. Please note that when Nancy Logan is asking her question, that's me behind her, looking very attentive, curious, and sometimes nail-biting.
Hello and welcome to this special hour of the early show, coming to you from the museum in Washington, D.C. Our focus this morning, the economy. A town hall with Republican leaders here to answer your questions, just as President Obama did in a similar event last month. I'm Erica Hill, along with CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent and host of Face the Nation, Bob Schieffer.
Hi, everybody. Well, we're here to talk with key Republican leaders this time about the economy. According to a recent CBS News poll, 79% of Americans believe the economy is bad. More than half of us are concerned about ourselves or someone in our household losing their job.
And unemployment, of course, is back above 9%. Gas prices still around $4 a gallon in many areas. And across the country, there are signs of a double dip in the housing market. Major economic issues affecting millions of Americans. So today, we've invited a cross-section of folks to ask Republican leaders what they can do to alleviate some of that pain. Our folks have submitted their questions about the issues they find most important, and we'll also be hearing from viewers who sent their questions in online.
So basically, we know what the questions is, they don't. But joining us are 4 distinguished Republican officials, beginning with Congressman Paul Ryan of Wisconsin. He, of course, is chairman of the House Budget Committee and the author of the Republican Budget Plan.
Also with us, Florida Congressman Alan West and South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who were both elected in the Republican way from the 2010 midterm elections.
And finally, Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn, who served with Congressman Ryan on the President's Deficit Commission. We want to say welcome to all 4 of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay. So let's get right to it. Our first question is from Trey Lewis, and this is for all 4 of you on the panel here. So, Trey?
Good morning, everyone. There are many ways that people feel as though President Obama isn't using to stimulate and make the economy more robust. If you were in a position to do so, what would be the one thing you would do to stimulate and grow the economy that President Obama isn't doing?
Start, Congressman.
One thing?
Just well, 30 to 45 seconds each, so you can each have time to answer.
First of all, I'd go in the opposite direction on spending, on taxes, on debt and deficits. Get rid of all the uncertainty in the economy. He's promising huge tax increases on successful small businesses. I wouldn't do that. Keep taxes low and get spending under control so we don't have a debt crisis. If we have a debt crisis, then we have a huge interest rate increase. We have an inflation problem. That's causing uncertainty in the economy. It's making it harder for businesses to create jobs. So I would go in a different direction than he has gone on fiscal policy, and that's exactly what we've done in the House, is offered a different direction on fiscal policy. Keep taxes and spending low, not high.
I think the exact same thing what Paul was talking about is creating the economic and fiscal policies that create confidence in the American consumer and also our small business owners. What I see down in my district is the small businesses are the economic engine that drive this country. But yet, when you look at some of the regulations that are coming in and it's restricting the access to capital for them to grow, and you look at some of the tax policies, which are going to preclude them from hiring more Americans. When you drive by in South Florida on U.S. Federal Highway 1, you see all those closed storefronts. You just have to think about maybe there were 6 to 8 Americans that once occupied those storefronts.
Governor?
You know, what I would like to see a president do is really lead and ask for a balanced budget, which he is yet to do. I think that's incredibly important. But from a governor's perspective, everything I've tried to do to govern in South Carolina has been stopped by President Obama. Whether it's how we're going to deal with the health care crisis, he's mandating more on our states and we can't afford it. Whether it's creating jobs, he's actually got the National Labor Relations Board suing a great American company for creating jobs in South Carolina. Or when it comes to illegal immigration, he's stopping my labor director from allowing her to enforce the laws that are in place. So, you know, the key is let the states have the flexibility and the freedom they need to have. In order for us to govern, which at the end of the day is really down to the states, the federal government needs to get out of the way. We need a president that really understands. Let the states understand what the 10th Amendment's all about. Let them have states' rights and let them handle their states in the way they need to.
Senator?
I think what needs to happen is we need to identify the real problem. And the real problem is America's anxious. It doesn't have confidence about where we're going. And that's, I think, a leadership deficit on behalf of my friend, President Obama. I think we need to talk true and honestly to the American public about the depth of our problems. They're not unsolvable, but they're unsolvable until we address them and identify them. And what Washington's big habit is we treat the symptoms of the problem rather than the problem. And so being honest and saying we don't have any choice. We have to eliminate $9.7 trillion out of the federal government's expenditures over the next 10 years to not go in the tank. Now, they can dispute that, but that's the fact. And if anything short of that will not solve the problem for your future or your children's future. There's $2.5 trillion sitting on the sideline in this country right now that could be invested if people had confidence and clarity about the future. And I don't believe President Obama has delivered that. And I think as soon as he does, you're going to see a big turnaround in the economy, regardless of what we do on the other things. Is we got to have confidence that we believe in our future. And I think that future is lacking because we haven't had the leadership to put that forward.
Well, that certainly gives you the Republican view of what's wrong with the economy right now. So that gives us a place to start here. Eric?
A nice overview. We want to move on to our next question now. Nancy Logan is an executive assistant who's currently between jobs. And chances are Nancy may look familiar if you were with us at last month's town hall. She was here. She asked the president pretty much the same question. So your chance now to ask it of Republican leaders.
Thank you, Erica. Hello. I was given a 3-year adjustable rate loan modification that ends in less than a year, and the rate is likely to go up significantly where I won't be able to afford my monthly mortgage payment. I can't refinance my house or move into a fixed rate mortgage because I owe more than the house is worth. My question is, what is your party in Congress doing to help Americans like myself who are stuck in this home mortgage process dilemma?
And we want to toss this one to Congressman West because I know in Florida, I believe it's 46% of homes are underwater.
Yeah, it's an incredible situation down in Florida where, of course, the subprime mortgage industry really took a toll. And I think the most important thing that we have to do is, from the policies we're creating up here, is set the conditions by which we can reduce the size and the scope of this federal government to get money back into your pockets so that you can stay into your home, so that you can have this job growth. I think that one of the problems that we have seen, if you go back and you look at the Community Reinvestment Redevelopment Act, you know, when government all of a sudden got involved into the mortgage industry, I mean, sooner or later, 30 years down the road, you see what happens. When all of a sudden we start to take those mortgage-backed securities and we're selling them freely between banks and also the foreign banks, then we have all this bad paper out there. So I think the most important thing is get back to sound economic principles that work and not come up with the Band-Aid remedies like this $8,000 mortgage credit that we give, which we saw really did not do anything to stimulate the mortgage industry.
Senator, Congressman.
Well, I would just say, like Tom Coburn said, why is this happening? It's happening because the economy's in the tank. There's no confidence. People don't feel confident about the future, so they're not going out and taking a risk and buying a home, and therefore bringing your home value up. So this is a symptom of a bad economy. So let's fix the economy. And there's a lot of things I hope we can get into about what is necessary to get this economy growing, because Washington's thrown a bunch of programs at you, and it's still not working. It's cost a lot of taxpayer liability. There's no substitute for economic growth and confidence in this economy to bring that market back up so you're not underwater anymore.
It had been a long and productive day. The next day was Flag Day, and we visited the Marine Iwo Jima Monument in Arlington National Cemetery. Listen while the story of this awesome monument is told.
Welcome to the Marine Corps War Memorial, also known as the Iwo Jima Memorial. While the monument itself is based around a World War II event, the memorial as such is dedicated to all Marine Corps who gave their lives in the defense of the United States since 1775. The massive statue ahead of you depicts the raising of the American flag at Mount Suribashi on the Japanese island of Iwo Jima on February 23, 1945. The monument is based on an iconic photo taken during the Battle of Iwo Jima in the Second World War. The island of Iwo Jima, which translates to Sulphur Island, is located strategically in the Pacific Ocean, 660 miles or 1,060 kilometers south of Tokyo. The Japanese used the islands as a scouting outpost, which warned the mainland of incoming attacks, while the Americans wanted to use the island for emergency landings for their long-range bombers. The seashore of Iwo Jima would allow the Americans to perform sea and air blockades and give them the ability to conduct intensive air bombardment, which could destroy the Japanese air and naval capabilities. The island was obviously quite important to both sides. The battle was fought over 36 days, with the Americans attacking the well-entrenched Japanese soldiers, resulting in heavy casualties on both sides. The small island is dominated by an old volcano on the south side, which became a strategically important mountain to hold during the battle, as it provided a view over a large part of the island. The Americans captured the mountain after 4 days of tough fighting and symbolically raised an American flag on the top. The flagpole was taken down and raised again later the same day, this time with a larger flag, and this time the flag raising was immortalized in Joseph Rothental's iconic photograph. The photo was shortly all over the American papers and became the symbol of the Pacific War Sea. The decision to construct the Iwo Jima statue and to build a memorial to the Marine Corps was taken the very same year the war was won. The project was entirely funded by donations from individuals and organizations who wanted to honor all those who fought during the war. The sculptor Felix de Welden and his colleagues worked on the project until it stood completed 9 years later in 1954. Even though the statue is one of the world's largest bronze statues, standing some 23 meters tall and weighing a massive 100 tons, great attention has been paid to its details. The 3 surviving flag raisers, Gagnon, Hayes and Bradley, all posed for the sculptor, who modeled their faces in clay. To sculpt the faces of those 3 who had given their lives, Strang, Block and Sousley, all available pictures and physical characteristics were collected and then used in the modeling of their faces. The whole statue was then completed in plaster, upon which it was disassembled and cast in bronze. The sheer size of the statue meant that several parts were molded separately and finally bolted together on site from the inside using a trap door on one of the figure's cartridge belts. The statue rests on a massive concrete base, surrounded by highly polished black granite from Sweden. The memorial was officially dedicated by President Dwight D. Eisenhower on November 10, 1954, the 179th anniversary of the U.S. Marine Corps. If you look at the middle of the granite base, you will see the phrase, "Uncommon valor was a common virtue." This quote is taken from Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz from a speech he gave to the sailors and Marines who fought at Iwo Jima, where he said, "Among the Americans who served on Iwo Island, uncommon valor was a common virtue." Below you can read Semper Fidelis. This is Latin meaning always faithful, which has been the motto of the U.S. Marine Corps since 1883. All around the black granite base, you can find inscriptions of battles in which the Marine Corps have served. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy issued a proclamation that the U.S. flag should always fly from the top of the memorial. This is one of the few official sites where this is required. Today, the Iwo Jima Memorial is an appreciated and honored memorial. Just like the picture it's based upon, it says more than 1,000 words.
Paid for with the blood, sweat, and sacrifices of the thousands who have been called Marines. For more than 2 centuries since their founding in 1775, the United States Marines have been guardians of a nation's ideals of right and freedom. On battlefields around the world, Marines have distinguished themselves with gritty determination and legendary acts of valor. Through 2 world wars and many other confrontations, generations of brave men have stood steadfast in the face of peril and demonstrated the indomitable warrior spirit that is uniquely Marine. Yet no battlefield stands out more vividly than Iwo Jima, site of the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. It was atop Mount Suribachi on this tiny island in the Pacific that an American flag would be raised for all the world to see. Captured in a photograph by Joe Rosenthal, this image would become the symbol of American values and the unsurpassed gallantry of the Marines. To further immortalize this event, sculptor Felix de Weldon spent 9 years creating a 3-dimensional figure that would stand forever in grand tribute to the patriotism, bravery, and honor of the Marine Corps. This monument would be called the Marine Corps War Memorial. Of the 6 men depicted on the monument, 5 Marines and a sailor, only 3 survived the battle for Iwo Jima. Those 3, John Bradley, Rene Gagnon, and Ira Hayes, posed for the sculptor, while photos and physical statistics were used to model the 3 who died in battle: Michael Strank, Harlan Block, and Franklin Sousley. Once the statue was completed, it was transported to a site near Arlington National Cemetery. Then, on November 10, 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower dedicated the memorial to all Marines who have given their lives in defense of the United States since the birth of the Corps. On hand for the dedication ceremony were photographer Rosenthal, sculptor de Weldon, and the 3 surviving flag raisers. At over 78 feet tall, the Marine Corps War Memorial is the largest bronze statue in the world and is one of a select few places where the American flag is authorized by presidential proclamation to be flown 24 hours a day. Since September 1956, the Marines of the oldest post of the Corps, Marine Barracks, Washington, D.C., have staged a weekly parade here throughout the summer to pay tribute to those who have died in service to their country. It has become known as the Sunset Parade.
Before we came close to the monument, our wonderful tour guide Clarence read a very moving story. It went like this. James Bradley just happened to be in Washington, D.C. to speak at the memorial the following day. He was there that night to say goodnight to his dad, who had previously passed away. He gathered a group of students from Wisconsin, and he told them this story. My name is James Bradley, and I'm from Antigo, Wisconsin. My dad is on that statue, and I wrote a book called Flags of Our Fathers. It's the story of the 6 boys you see behind me. 6 boys raised the flag. The first guy putting the pole in the ground is Harlan Block. Harlan was an all-state football player, and he enlisted in the Marine Corps with all of his senior members of his football team. They were off to play another type of game, a game called war. But it didn't turn out to be a game. Harlan, at the age of 21, died with his intestines in his hands. Now, I don't say that to gross you out. I say that because there are generals who stand in front of this statue and talk about the glory of war. You guys need to know that most of the 7,000 boys who died on Iwo Jima were 17, 18, and 19 years old. Here, look up at the statue here. You see this next guy? That's Rene Gagnon from New Hampshire. If you took Rene's helmet off the moment this photo was taken and looked in the webbing of that helmet, you'd find a photograph of his girlfriend. Rene put that photograph in there for protection because he was scared. He was 18 years old. Boys won the Battle of Iwo Jima. Boys, not old men. The next guy here, the third guy in this tableau, was Sergeant Mike Strank. Now, Mike is my hero. He was the hero of all these guys. They called him the old man because he was so old. He was already 24. When Mike would motivate the boys in training camp, he didn't say, let's go kill some Japanese or let's die for our country. He knew he was talking to little boys. Instead, he would say, you do what I say and I'll get you home to your mothers. The last guy on this side of the statue is Ira Hayes, a Pima Indian from Arizona. Ira Hayes walked off Iwo Jima. He went to the White House with my dad. President Truman told him, you're a hero. He told reporters, how can I feel like a hero when 250 of my buddies hit the island with me and only 27 of us walked off alive? So you take your class at school, 250 of you, spending a year together, having fun, doing everything together, then all 250 of you hit the beach, but only 27 of your classmates walk off alive. That was Ira Hayes. He had images of horror in his mind. Ira Hayes died dead drunk, face down, at the age of 32, 10 years after this picture was taken. The next guy going around the statue is Franklin Southley from Hilltop, Kentucky, a fun-loving hillbilly boy. His best friend had told me, we pushed 2 cows up on the porch of the Hilltop General Store. Then we strung wire across the stairs so the cows couldn't get down. Then we fed them Epsom salts. Well, you know what happened. Yes, he was a fun-loving hillbilly boy. Franklin died on Iwo Jima at the age of 19. When the telegram came to tell his mother that he was dead, it went up to the Hilltop General Store. A barefoot boy ran that telegram up to his mother's farm. The neighbors could hear her scream all night and into the next morning. And the neighbors lived a quarter-mile away. The next guys who continue around the statue is my dad, John Bradley, from Antigua, Wisconsin, where I was raised. My dad lived until 1994, but would never give interviews. When Walter Cronkite's producers or the New York Times would call, we were trained as little kids to say, no, I'm sorry, sir, my dad's not here. He's in Canada fishing. No, there's no phone there, sir. No, we don't know when he's coming back. My dad never fished or even went to Canada. Usually he was sitting there right at the table eating his Campbell's soup, but we had to tell the press he was out fishing. He didn't want to talk to the press. You see, my dad didn't see himself as a hero. Everyone thinks these guys were heroes because they're in a photo and on a monument. My dad knew better. He was a medic. John Bradley from Wisconsin was a caregiver. On Iwo Jima, he probably held over 200 boys as they died, and when boys died in Iwo Jima, they writhed and screamed in pain. When I was a little boy, my third-grade teacher told me my dad was a hero. When I went home and told my dad that, he looked at me and said, I want you to always remember that the heroes of Iwo Jima are the guys who did not come back. Did not come back. Well, that's the story about 6 nice young boys. 3 died on Iwo Jima, and 3 came back as national heroes. Over 7,000 boys died on Iwo Jima in the worst battle in the history of the Marine Corps. I've My voice is giving out, so I'll end it there. Thank you for your time. Well, then suddenly the monument wasn't just a big old piece of metal with a flag sticking out of the top. It came to life before our eyes with the heartfelt words of a son who did indeed have a father who was a hero. Maybe not a hero for the reasons most people would believe, but a hero nonetheless. Our hearts are were full of emotion and gratitude as we left the Iwo Jima Memorial and moved on to the next. This magnificent facility was constructed in the depths of the Great Depression in the 1930s. Records of government were stored in individual government departments and in many cases were in very poor condition.
This is a map. That map of the United States. Oh, yeah. So what this one is talking about, the red parts of the United States are talking about the whole map. And that's the bill. Copper fragment of the little itty tiny piece inside the statue. Still be able to stand on its own. Test it to see how strong it was.
To provide meaning to our visit, we became archival researchers. They conducted a seminar where we researched several questions and examined a number of relevant documents. We learned how to use their online resource, which will allow us to enrich our classrooms greatly. I had a chance to at least briefly look like I was directing the research. Before our trip ended, we were taken into the rotunda, where the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and Bill of Rights are preserved in this extraordinary vault system that protects the documents from the destructive elements of light and air. Our weary crew sat in the lovely weather of Washington as we waited for our trusty bus to reappear. After lunch, we walked to the Mies van der Rohe designed Martin Luther King Jr. Library. There we were able to see the famous MLK mural inspired by Gandhi. The afternoon ended with free time to explore some of the magnificent museums located along the mall. I chose to explore the Museum of Natural History, while others examined the Museum of American History, the National Gallery of Art, or the Museum of the American Indian. Our third day saw us becoming clandestine spies in the American Spy Museum. In addition to being amazed at this very unique collection, we had an opportunity to practice a sophisticated lesson plan based on the Cuban Missile Crisis. We had to analyze the intelligence that the president used to make his momentous decision. This was definitely a wow experience that all of us can use in our teaching.
It is the first and only public museum in the United States solely dedicated to espionage, and the only one in the world to provide a global perspective on this all but invisible profession. Welcome to the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. Here you'll adopt your own cover identity inside the briefing room before proceeding to the main exhibits. And throughout, you will constantly be tested to see if you have what it takes to go undercover. From there, you'll proceed into the School for Spies. Examine over 200 spy gadgets, learn about advances in bug technology, and test your skills of observation, analysis, and surveillance at interactive stations. Learn where bugs are planted, crawl through air ducts, and marvel at life-size displays of spies in action. Have you ever seen a necktie camera? Hundreds of gadgets line the walls, from specially designed lipstick guns, suitcase radios, and secret writing detection kits. Flashlight guns, cigarette case guns, and spy kits that were hidden inside the body lead the way to replicas of an American embassy designed to block eavesdropping attempts by the KGB. Do you know the secret history of history? Travel back through the centuries to trace the earliest moments of the second oldest profession. See the storm clouds gathering as World War II draws near, and learn about how the Enigma worked and was eventually broken. Go behind enemy lines with life-size replicas and cases lined with weaponry. Head downstairs into a fallout shelter, examine watches that dispense tear gas, and walk through a replica tunnel dug by the CIA into East Berlin in 1954. 10, 9, 8. After a visit to the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., it may be normal to feel a bit paranoid. At the very least, you will have learned about several important periods in history and taken with you the knowledge of the men and women who go unnoticed in the daily fight to defend our freedoms.
We next moved to a special house on S Street, just off Embassy Row, where Woodrow Wilson retired in 1921.
In March of 1921, President Woodrow Wilson and his wife Edith left the White House at the conclusion of his second term and moved into a home on S Street near Embassy Row in Washington. Operated by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Woodrow Wilson House is now a museum. Executive Director Frank Osella gave American Artifacts a tour of the home and discussed the life and presidency of Woodrow Wilson. This is part one of a two-part program.
Woodrow Wilson moved into this house in March of 1921, so 90 years ago, on the old inauguration day. He left the White House, attended the ceremony for President Harding, and then immediately moved into a private home here in Washington, D.C. Really among few of our presidents ever choose to live in Washington, D.C. in their post-presidential years. Woodrow Wilson decided that this would be the perfect place for him to reside, since his second wife, Edith, was a Washingtonian. Here in the entrance hall of the house, visitors who visited Wilson were greeted at the front door. Wilson's brother-in-law served as his secretary, took his appointments. Few visitors visited the house. However, people who did arrive would see Wilson generally at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Wilson would then either accompany them on a motor ride through the parklands in and around Washington, D.C. If they were family guests, certainly they would be invited to dine here in the house. And on Saturday evenings, they would attend the theater. They'd go to Keith's Vaudeville House here in Washington, D.C. Wilson was a regular attendee, and each Saturday evening, the crowds would wait expecting the president, the former president at that time, to take his seat up in the balcony. The house was built in 1915. The Wilsons were the second occupants of the house. Mrs. Wilson had the task of finding a suitable home for her husband. Wilson had received the Nobel Peace Prize in December of 1920, and along with that came a $50,000 cash award. Wilson used that money to put a deposit down on the house, and 10 friends from Princeton and White House associates helped make the $150,000 asking price for the house. The great thing about the house and the collections here at the Wilson House is that everything was brought in with the Wilsons when they moved in 1921. So items from Wilson's home in Princeton, items from Edith Wilson's home here in Washington, and the things that they had acquired together in the White House, including gifts of state, personal gifts, wedding gifts, were all brought here to S Street. They remain here today, and so we serve as the Presidential Museum for Woodrow Wilson.
I was impressed with the stately mansion, and little things like the pen that Wilson used to sign the Treaty of Versailles, his office desk, and the bed where he died. We also learn more about Edith Galt Wilson, his second wife, described by some as the first woman president. We ended this very busy day at the moving World War II Memorial, which is tucked between the reflecting pool and the Washington Monument.
Between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument lies a place that pays special tribute to the sacrifice of America's World War II generation, the National World War II Memorial. The United States entered the war following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7, 1941.
That since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
This granite and bronze memorial is expertly woven into the existing landscape, preserving and complementing the views along the famous National Mall. Its design is the vision of architect Friedrich St. Florian, chosen from about 400 original entries. At its heart, the Memorial Plaza and the Rainbow Pool let visitors reflect on the heroism, significance, and consequences of the bloodiest war in human history. Surrounding the plaza are 56 tall granite pillars representing every state and the District of Columbia, along with the U.S. territories of the time. Each pillar is topped with a bronze wreath of oak and wheat. And representing the unity of all the states and territories is a sculpted bronze rope that connects each pillar. At the western end of the plaza is perhaps the memorial's most hallowed place. The Freedom Wall is an expressive field of gold stars representing approximately 400,000 American lives lost in World War II. There are 4,000 stars here, each one representing 100 individuals who made the ultimate sacrifice for freedom. The plaza is flanked by two 43-foot-tall pavilions that symbolize victory, both in the Atlantic Theater and in the Pacific. From the pavilions, curving pathways lead down into the plaza. The memorial is designed for easy access by everyone who visits. And along the main walkways leading from 17th Street into the plaza are a series of bas-relief sculptures by Ray Caskey. The 24 panels depict the transformation of America as the country entered a war that would eventually span the globe. Today, people who come from around the nation and around the world find a unique memorial that will stand for the ages as a powerful remembrance to tremendous sacrifice and a cautious reminder of the great cost of liberty.
Most of the next day was spent working at the Holocaust Museum. We learned about the numerous resources available to teach about this horrific experience. It was also an emotional day, discovering again the horrors of the Holocaust.
It has been said that in order to truly experience something, you have to experience it in person. Those words have never been more true than after a visit to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. We have all read the stories, but absolutely nothing can compare to seeing the horror and tragedy caused by Nazi Germany. Immediately you're confronted with images and wartime film that brings to life things you had only read about in books. Clothes worn inside the brutal concentration camps hang above you as you walk by numerous exhibits depicting the early Nazi assault and the events leading up to World War II. Horse-drawn wagons, Torah scrolls that were desecrated, and a tree stump that marked a mass grave near a Polish village are but 3 exhibits on this floor that you'll spend hours learning about. Newspapers from around the United States display headlines of Nazi terror, even years before we became involved in the war. You'll learn about tragic personal stories, including one of Louise, who spent the first 3 years of her life hiding from the Nazis. Step into a rail car that once transported Jews from all over Europe to ghettos, concentration camps, and killing centers. Walk through barracks from Auschwitz that frequently held hundreds of prisoners who had to sleep 5 or 6 across on a single bunk. Nothing can prepare you for the piles of shoes from those lost to us throughout the war, nor the ovens where bodies were burned. The final floor houses a boat used in October of 1943 to rescue more than 7,000 Jews. Exhibits document the German retreat, and a memorial wall remembers all those who risked their lives during the war to save what Jews they could. Before you leave, pause to visit the eternal flame, underneath which lies earth both gathered from the death camps and from cemeteries of American soldiers who fought and died to defeat Nazi Germany, and light your own candle in remembrance of all those whose lives were tragically cut short. There is no excuse, and there is no reason for what happened during the years of Adolf Hitler. Our solemn duty is to never forget and to ensure that democracy lives on so that these horrible events can never happen again.
As we left the Holocaust Museum, we walked to the Jefferson Memorial. However, our plans were changed when we were rained out. Later that evening, after we dried off, we had an opportunity to meditate at the Vietnam Memorial, Lincoln Memorial, and Korean Memorial. The final day of the trip started at the United States Naval Museum. We were early and had a chance to look at the outside exhibits first. Here's a gun turret from the USS Maine that exploded in Havana Harbor in 1898.
History lives and breathes at the National Museum of the United States Navy, located at the Washington Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. One of about a dozen museums around the nation operated by the Navy, the National Museum is devoted to the display of naval artifacts, models, documents, and fine art. The museum recounts the history of the United States Navy from the American Revolution to present-day conflicts. The museum interprets naval history for members of the armed forces, but also for families and school-aged children. And unlike many museums, where all exhibits are behind glass walls and velvet ropes, children get an up-close and unique experience at the National Museum of the U.S. Navy.
And we do that through a series of different exhibits, a lot of which are hands-on, that help us attract children and families. In fact, a recent visitor said that we're the most kid-friendly museum in Washington, D.C. My children used to think that I came not to work but to play here.
Kids especially enjoy the interactive exhibits that commemorate the Navy's wartime heroes and battles, as well as peacetime contributions in exploration, diplomacy, navigation, and humanitarian service. The museum also provides structured activities for school children, strongly emphasizing science.
Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is the backbone of this program. When we designed it, we designed the curriculum for Homeschool Monday and Thursday to be very intensive as far as STEM areas are concerned.
The program provides a classroom and lab setting away from school and has an added component that makes it special.
Also just being able to provide them with the interaction with the professionals, with the scientists, with when we do aeronautics, we have, a helicopter pilot, a jet pilot come down and able to talk to the students. So being able to interact with their greater community rather than just reading it in a book.
Located in the historic Washington Navy Yard, the National Museum is the flagship museum of the United States Navy and part of the Navy's History and Heritage Command, which includes other research facilities. Admission to the museum is free, but a photo ID is required. For more information, call 202-433-4882 or visit www.history.navy.mil. Get a hands-on feel for your Navy's history with an inspiring visit to the National Museum of the U.S. Navy at the Washington Navy Yard in Washington, D.C.
The end of our museum experience, I took the wheel. We ended our visit to the Naval Museum with a tour of the decommissioned USS Berry. Then on to the United States Capitol. In the Visitors Center, we got our first look at the statuary. The model of Statue of Freedom that tops the U.S. Capitol was our introduction to statuary. Each state is entitled to 2 statues. This one is of King Kamehameha of Hawaii and Sacagawea of North Dakota. From the Visitor Center we saw a film and then moved to the Rotunda and Statuary Hall.
In the Rotunda you can see everything. It tells you the whole story of American history and how we've struggled for years to define it, to describe it, and to show the world what it means. The thread that ties all the people together, who I think you can identify by name in the Capitol and especially in the Rotunda, is the notion of expanding rights, expanding civil rights, expanding freedoms. Other countries have ideologies, but it's America's fate to be an ideology. He's sitting there, ascending into the heavens. He's surrounded by the 13 colonies. Just on either side of him are 2 figures, and you can see that one of them is holding something that looks like an axe inside a bundle of sticks. Those are fasces. It's an ancient Roman symbol of power and authority of government. Each little shaft is very delicate, and you can break it pretty easily. But you put a lot of them together, and they're very strong. And that reflects, of course, not only the ancient Roman idea that the Roman people together are strong, but also the idea in America that together we create a great nation. Some of the other stuff there that doesn't today seem terribly American to us are all the folks around the edge. Those are all Greek and Roman gods. So they're trying to sort of evoke that long heritage, much older than this not very old nation at the time this was made, with these Greek and Roman gods. But the funny thing is, if you look, they're kind of mixed in with Americans. National Statuary Hall, once the Hall of the House, where the House Chamber met and had enormous battles, now is a space where we step back from those battles and see people who achieved things over the whole course of their lives in the statues that are represented there. The statues there range from early in the collection from the 19th century right up through the 20th century. There's Father Sarah from California, a priest who founded a string of missions up the coast of California. Ethan Allen is in Statuary Hall, and he was a hard-drinking philosopher and orator, and led this tiny little 2-bit area that wasn't even a state, led it to become first an independent nation, Vermont, and then a state, sheerly by force of personality. There's Francis Willard, who was a reformer, a great fighter for suffrage as well as against liquor, demon rum. Right next to her is Robert E. Lee. There are other Confederate heroes in there as well. Jefferson Davis is also in Statuary Hall. And those represent a period in time when the statues coming into Statuary Hall were very much about reconciliation. They were after Reconstruction had ended, and people were getting enough money in the South they could maybe even come up with a statue. And also, there was this sense of tolerance. Almost as if there was this misty-eyed memory nationally, not just in the South, of the Civil War. The National Statuary Hall collection doesn't include everyone that it should. It really was primarily created in the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century. And we know those to have been particularly hard years for many groups, but especially for African Americans. That's one of the great lacks in the National Statuary Hall collection. The Congress tries very hard to remedy that in other areas. Martin Luther King Jr.'s bust has a place of honor in the rotunda. The House and the Senate have both have commissioned artworks of the first African American members of those bodies. Every generation creates history in America anew, and we do that in our art here. You can see in the Capitol how every generation we've expanded and changed the idea of what kind of art we want to have here. The National Statuary Hall collection has existed for well over a century, and one of the things I find fascinating is how in very recent years many of the statues that have come in have really changed the tenor of that collection and have changed, indeed, the tenor of all of the art in the Capitol. Lately, here in the 20th and 21st century, we've been much more interested in the common man. The state statues that come in here have more to do with people who are inventors or explorers or reformers, not so much the statesmen, the politicians, or the founders. We're more interested in people like Sarah Winnemucca, who's a native leader, a private citizen. I think in an ideal world, we would love to see all the people in the nation reflected in as many places and as many ways as possible. And I think as we've grown as a nation, we've grown in ways that we view the different contributions of our citizens beyond just politicians and military folks to encompass all the ways we contribute.
We took the tunnel walk to the Jefferson Building of the Library of Congress. One of the things that's quite impressive is that they've mostly reassembled the library that Jefferson originally donated to start the Library of Congress. We walked down the street past the Supreme Court building.
Learn about the judicial branch of the United States government at the Supreme Court. First New York, next Philadelphia, the Supreme Court then moved to Washington, D.C. The building is constructed of marble from the U.S. and other parts of the world. Don't miss out on experiencing a pillar of the United States government. Take in the classical architecture and masterful sculptures, each with its own interesting story. Inside are busts of every past Chief Justice, and visitors can enjoy an educational film. Don't delay your decision. Visit the Supreme Court. It would be unjust not to.
From there, it was time to head back to sunny Florida. We learned a lot. Now when we teach about our nation's history, we'll be able to bring alive the meaning behind the icons.